Go on and lay out how you see all of this playing out. It seems that Washington, D.C. and D.C. officials are reluctantly starting to work with the Trump administration. It might be reluctant, but at least it appears at this moment that there is some cooperation. How do you see all of this ultimately playing out, especially since the timetable at the moment is fairly short?
Yeah, let's walk through some of the history here. So we saw that DEA Administrator Terry Cole was appointed as the chief law enforcement officer for D.C. when the quote-unquote federal takeover took place. The reason that that's allowed is that D.C. is much different than any other place in the sense that the president essentially controls the District of Columbia. Now, Donald Trump decided to declare an emergency there, which under the Home Rule Statute allows him to take temporary control over the District of Columbia for emergency purposes. Unfortunately, one of the things that does not allow is the replacement of those people in authority positions, including the police chief and including those on the committee that sort of handle D.C. So the reversal here comes for a couple of reasons. First, it's because I think that there wasn't really statutory authority to name Terry Cole as the chief law enforcement officer. But second, this sends, after some lawsuits, this sends it creates a bit of bad precedent, which could be used for federal takeover in other districts. Imagine, for instance, that the other party gained power in the office of the presidency, executive power, and decided that they wanted to take over some other city, maybe a city in Texas. Well, they would cite to this case to say that there should be some federal authority for that, and that can happen. And I don't think Donald Trump wants to get into that fight. So there we see Pam Bondi's tweet. She's sort of backing away. And what Home Rule really allows is for federal authorities to cooperate with the D.C. Police Department, and both will execute the laws faithfully as they're supposed to do. And this is the type of cooperation we want. I think this is the best thing for D.C., and it's certainly a good move by Pam Bondi. Hey, we're allowed to reverse course when we feel like we need to change tactics to comply with the statutes and the laws. That's what a good administration does, not really what we got from the prior administration. So I'm happy to see this move.
Let's take a look at this Associated Press headline, quote, 3 Republican-led states to send hundreds of National Guard troops to Washington. Now, I was walking around yesterday afternoon. I saw several National Guard troops at the monument, by the Capitol, also by the White House. But what does it send the message to other states that, hey, if you've got the resources, why not join forces with these other states and let's clean up our nation's capital? And I think that's a very popular thing amongst people. I talk to people on the streets. No one's against their city streets being safer. But what do you think comes about this? We've had this already, a few states pitching in.
Yeah, I think it's great that states are cooperating, but I think we need to exercise a bit of caution here. I was a Marine Corps officer for some time, and I worked very closely with the National Guard and other authorities on some local projects, border protection and whatnot. One of the concerns that I have when we put U.S. troops, especially National Guard, in sort of policing roles, I start to get concerned that we might have a Kent State sort of situation. For those who recall, there was an issue at Kent State that resulted in a shooting, and I think it was a kind of a bit of a black mark on the National Guard as a whole. We need to be very careful when we're putting people into an area, especially those who have military training, and we're asking them to perform traditional police functions, because the National Guard has limited capability in this sort of environment. They really shouldn't be setting up roadblocks and arresting people. They need to assist and help protect, but they really shouldn't be on the offensive here. So I am concerned that this is a bit of a misuse of the National Guard if it's for anything more than emergency support. We don't want to see an occupying force inside of D.C. I would much rather training and equipping D.C. police to do the job that they know they should do and supporting them in that role. That's what we should see. And I imagine that's what those commanders on the ground are probably advising their troops to do.
Ronald, I hear your concerns loud and clear, and I also realize, and you laid this out, I think, very eloquently, that Washington, D.C. is a fairly unique case study in terms of President Trump's authority. However, it harkens back to L.A. earlier this summer when President Trump deployed National Guard troops. How much of a precedent do you think this will set for President Trump being able to potentially deploy National Guard troops in other major U.S. cities, other major states, potentially even trumping, for lack of a better word, the local authorities there?
Yeah, so when we have the local authorities just taunting the federal government and saying we're not going to comply with your laws, like we saw in Los Angeles, when we see them make a disaster of their city and a disaster of their state because of the misuse of public resources, and we see that corruption gets in the way of the ability to protect the people in that area, especially those who are working with the federal government, then what needs to happen is that sort of support from the National Guard. That's exactly what the National Guard is created for. So where we see local authorities completely fail to exercise their police power and take care of their people and protect their people, certainly the federal government can and should step in order to make sure that federal law is enforced faithfully. That's what Donald Trump raised his right hand and took the oath of office to say. That's what Pam Bondi swore on as well, and that's what Kash Patel swore on, and these people are exercising their oaths. So D.C., unique test case. L.A., that's a case where they're flaunting federal authorities and trying to evade federal law, and I think the action was absolutely appropriate in that case.
Ronald Chapman, we appreciate your time. Good perspective there. Thanks so much for being here with us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ronald.
Of course.